I tell myself it's just my imagination, a trick of the mind. But deep down, I know better. Matthew has always been a man of composure, the kind who measures his words and keeps his emotions in check. But lately, something is different. His silence carries a weight it never had before. His gaze lingers, sharp and searching, as if he's looking for answers he already knows. There's something in the way he moves, in the way he watches me. The air between us feels thick, heavy with the weight of unspoken words. The tension has been building for days, creeping into the quiet moments, filling the spaces between glances and breaths. And then, on what should have been just another evening, it finally broke. Dinner was as ordinary as ever, the soft clatter of plates, the comforting aroma of a home-cooked meal wrapping around us like a familiar embrace. But beneath the surface, something restless stirred. I could feel it, that same uneasy presence pressing against my ribs, making each breath feel just a little bit harder to take. Matthew sat across from me, his movement precise, his posture unnaturally rigid. He barely touched his food. Neither did I. The silence between us spoke louder than any words ever could. And yet, our son Ethan remained blissfully unaware, filling the quiet with laughter and stories from his day. His voice was bright, a small flicker of light in the growing darkness. For a moment, I let myself pretend everything was fine, that we were just a normal family sharing a meal, that nothing had changed. But then Matthew spoke, and the illusion shattered. Evelyn. Just my name. A single word. But the way he said it sent an icy shiver down my spine. There was something in his voice, something stripped of warmth, of softness. It was steady, too steady, controlled in a way that felt unnatural. I forced myself to meet his gaze, my stomach twisting into knots. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. But I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Matthew leaned back in his chair, arms crossing over his chest. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes, hesitation, maybe even sadness, but just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by something colder. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, each word measured, careful. "About us. About our family." A small, fragile smile ghosted across his lips, one that didn't reach his eyes. It was a kind of smile that came before something broke. I swallowed hard. "Matthew, what's going on?" But he didn't answer. Instead, he reached toward the drawer beside him, his movements deliberate, almost calculated. My breath caught as I watched him pull out a manila envelope and place it carefully on the table between us. The sight of it sent a chill through me. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, barely able to touch the edge. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried something far greater than mere paper. "What is this?" My voice was barely a whisper. Matthew didn't answer right away. He simply watched as I slid the papers out, my hand shaking, my breath coming faster. The words on the page blurred before I could even read them, my vision swimming with unshed tears. But I didn't need to see them to understand. I already knew. The truth was written all over his face. "Ethan isn't my son, is he?" Matthew's voice was quiet, but there was something sharp beneath it, an edge honed by betrayal. He wasn't asking. He already knew. But still, he clung to some desperate, crumbling hope that he was wrong. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My chest tightened, my pulse hammering so hard I thought I might shatter under the weight of it. "Answer me, Evelyn." The demand cut through the silence like a blade, leaving no room to escape. Tears spilled over, streaking hot down my cheeks. I wanted to explain, to reach for some words that would make it all make sense. But how do you explain something unforgivable? How do you erase a betrayal that's already carved into his expression? "Matthew, it's not what you think," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He let out a bitter laugh, one that held no trace of humor. It was sharp, jagged, full of something broken. "It's not what I think." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "Then explain it to me, Evelyn. Explain this." He motioned toward the document still clenched in my shaking hands. I dropped my gaze, as if looking at it any longer might change the truth. But the words didn't disappear. They stayed, unyielding, like a sentence that had already been passed. There was no undoing this, no taking it back. The life we had built, the family we had created, it was already unraveling, thread by thread. I had spent years desperately trying to hold everything together, clinging to the fragile illusion of the life I had built. But now, as I sat across from Matthew, his expression carved from raw betrayal, I felt it all crumbling beneath me. I made a terrible mistake, I finally admitted, my voice cracking under the weight of the truth. Matthew repeated my words, his face twisted with disbelief. A mistake. His voice trembled, thick with something more than anger, pain. You let me believe Ethan was my son for 6 years. His breath was ragged as he continued, each word landing like a brutal blow. 6 years, Evelyn. You let me love him, raise him, give him everything I had. And now you're telling me it was all a lie. The agony in his voice was unbearable. It reached into me, twisting deep, tearing at something inside my chest. I could feel it. The trust he once had in me slipping away, dissolving into the air between us. I didn't want this, I whispered, desperation clawing at my throat. I never wanted it to end like this. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table. I thought it didn't matter. I convinced myself it didn't matter. Matthew's hands clenched into fists. The composure he had always held so tightly shattered before my eyes, his emotions breaking free in waves of raw, unfiltered rage. But it does matter, Evelyn, he snapped, his voice rising. It matters more than you think. Before I could say anything else, a small voice broke through the storm between us. Mom? Dad? Both of us turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was Ethan. His wide, innocent eyes flickered between us, his small face filled with worry. The weight of our argument was something even a child couldn't ignore. Matthew exhaled sharply and ran a hand over his face. His expression softened just slightly as he turned to our son. Buddy, go to your room, okay? Mom and I need to talk. Ethan hesitated, glancing between us. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew something was wrong. After a moment, he nodded and turned away, his small footsteps echoing down the hall. And then he was gone. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Matthew turned back to me, and just like that, the brief flicker of tenderness vanished. His face hardened again. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter now, but full of something dark. I've suspected for a while, he said, his tone heavy with something I couldn't quite name. The secret phone calls, the late nights. I tried to trust you, Evelyn. I really did. His jaw tightened, so I pushed my suspicions aside. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was being paranoid. He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Turns out, I wasn't. I stepped toward him, reaching out, desperate to close the space between us, but he recoiled instantly, as if my touch would burn him. No, his voice was cold. Final. You had 6 years to tell me the truth, Evelyn. 6 years. He shook his head, something almost like disbelief flickering in his eyes. And instead, you lied to me. Every single day. Before I could respond, he reached for something else on the table, a stack of bank statements. He picked up a single document and held it up for me to see. I froze. Our accounts, he said flatly. They are frozen. My stomach lurched. You can't do this, I pleaded, panic surging through me. Oh, I can. His voice was like ice. I already did. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto mine with a cold, unwavering stare. You won't be spending any more of my money. A wave of panic crashed over me. The life I had carefully built, the security I had clung to, was unraveling before my eyes. It was slipping through my fingers like sand, no matter how desperately I tried to hold on. And about Jack. The name sent another shock of dread through me. Matthew's lips curled into something bitter. I told his boss everything. A chill ran down my spine. What? My voice was barely a whisper. The affair. His eyes bore into mine, merciless. The paternity test. Every detail. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, his expression unreadable. Jack's done. He won't be working anytime soon. I felt the breath leave my lungs. Matthew, please, I begged, my voice hoarse. Don't do this. He shook his head. You did this, Evelyn. Not me. His voice wavered slightly, but his resolve never did. You made your choices. Now face the consequences. His chair scraped against the floor as he pushed it back. He stood there for a moment, staring down at me, and for the briefest second, I saw something flicker in his gaze, something that looked like sadness. But it was gone almost immediately. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. The words hit me like a hammer, knocking the breath from my lungs. Ethan is innocent in all of this, he continued, his voice quieter now, steadier. But you, his eyes darkened. You will have to figure this out on your own. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The front door slammed behind him, the sharp sound echoing through the house, through my chest, through the hollow space where my heart used to be. I sat there, frozen, staring at the empty space he had left behind. The reality of what had just happened crashed down on me, suffocating, inescapable. I had destroyed everything. Before I could even fully process it, I heard the soft, hesitant footsteps again. Mom! Ethan. His voice was small, uncertain. Is everything okay? I wiped my face quickly, forcing a smile that felt brittle, empty. It's okay. Honey, don't worry. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close. But even as I did, the weight of everything I had done pressed down on me like a crushing wave. I had betrayed the man who had loved me. I had shattered the trust that had once held our family together. And worst of all, I had hurt the one person who depended on me the most. The life I had taken for granted was gone, and in its place there was only emptiness,